Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to The Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Kia ora iwi, and welcome to the Kaka. I am Bernard Hickey, the co-host, along with Peter Bale, co-host across the water in Tamaki Makaurau. How are you, Peter?
Bernard, I'm good, thank you. Oh, and there's your glamorous assistant.
Glamorous indeed, and with just what I need, a glass of cold water on a hot day.
Excellent. And Bernard, what is that little bird badge you've got there? Is that some new Kaka merchandise you've got?
Well, this is quite something. I was on a ferry today, and a Kaka subscriber just rocked up, and he's a good friend. And he gave me this wonderful little badge, Kaka badge. So I'm collecting all sorts of Kaka merchandise. And that's my, it's
I've
really,
never seen one.
Good.
I think you should get quite a few of those, wouldn't you?
That's right. No,
but how sweet. Did he have it on his shirt and just gave it to you, or had he been
he'd been
carrying
saving
it around?
Up, I think. He'd been saving it up. He'd seen it and he thought, oh, this would be great for Bernard. So I have, I'm very proud to wear it today. Thank you very much.
I think we all proudly wear our, I'd wear a Kaka badge for at least one day a week anyway, or sort of for an hour and one day a week.
There's a business model in merch, definitely.
I was thinking about Kakas and Kias this week because I love the Kaka. I follow that chap in my bird photography Facebook feeds who takes pictures of the Kaka on Great Barrier Island, where they just seem to be going completely mad. Yeah. But I was struck about the Kia because for some reason, from an investment point of view, I'm getting promotions to invest in Kia Aerospace, which is in fact, we'll get him on. It's a fascinating company in Christchurch run by a chap called Mark Rocket. And yes, he did change his name by deed poll from Mark Stevens. And he was one of the founders with Peter Beck of Rocket Lab. And he's created this company that has remote control drones effectively that fly at 56,000 feet to monitor environmental damage in the oceans and sea and fisheries and all of that kind of stuff. And it's a fantastic company. I might get them on, but of course, if I invest in it, I'll let you know. But I just thought Kia, Kaka, it's all the same.
Oh, absolutely. I've actually
New Zealand parrots.
I've met Mark. He's very interesting and certainly quite informed on climate change too.
Very, very.
And I think may have some views on geoengineering too. So that will be an interesting chat.
Oh, I'll get him to come on. He's a lovely chat, and I think he really parted company from Peter Beck at Rocket Lab about the use of Rocket Lab with the US Defence Department. My sense is that was a fairly big issue for him, but he is going to collaborate with the New Zealand Defence Service to help provide drones for monitoring the New Zealand 200-mile limit.
Well, that's really important because, in fact, we probably won't be able to do it with actual ships with actual people. It's just too big.
No, well, and apparently most of ours are not entirely in entirely perfect working condition at the moment.
No, and actually the main problem, as everything is the main problem, is that a good chunk of our naval staff can't afford the housing in Devonport.
Well, didn't I see today that the Defence Minister Judith Collins has announced quite a substantial, $4 billion or something to fix up Devonport and some of the other military bases. So that's good.
When you scratch beneath the surface, there hasn't actually been that much funding actually awarded yet for actual buildings. There's a lot of, this is what I call a vaporware headlined funding announcement. Yeah. When you look closely, it seems to disappear in front of you.
Well, funny enough, I was also looking at Devonport the other day and thinking it would make some pretty bloody good real estate.
Well, there's a bunch of people in the government who I think would love to sell that entire Devonport thing and move everyone to Whangarei or something. Yeah. No.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
That's right. Hey,
and Bernard, what have we got on today? Should we go through the run through? You've presumably had a swim today. We can bypass all the nice things because I had a lovely swim, which was gorgeous.
Oh, it's the water temperature has gone nuts, just like the climate is going nuts, and I'm enjoying the swims. But you're right. Let's crack on with the plan for the show, which is shortly we're going to be speaking to Kule Wong, who is the new leader of the Opportunity Party, previously TOP. and we'll talk to her until about 20 past 5. Then we've got Robert Patman on, our regular guest on geopolitics. After that, we'll be speaking to Catherine Dyer, Dr. Catherine Dyer from Victoria University, who regularly talks to us about climate. There's been plenty of climate action this week, and then at the end, you and I will have a chance to.
Well, you're going to do a bit of a soliloquy on the economy, on interest rates, and KiwiSaver, right? Can we get all of those into one Bernard soliloquy?
Short one. That's right. Yeah. No, it will be a fun show. Another cracker as we get closer to the end of the year. I have that sort of telescopic feeling at the moment where it's all rushing towards the end. Another 3 or 4 weeks.
You mean of the year? Yeah.
Another 3 or 4 weeks, and we'll all be lying exhausted on the footpath. But yeah, no, it's been a big old year, and let's bring in Kule Wong, who is with us in the green room, as we say.
And she's and Kule, you're at your own, or Q, you're at your own party event this evening.
I am, so apologies for any background noise. I'm in a pub in Whangarei because we're about to have a public meeting here. Just been catching up with some of the members, and now got a few more people from the public coming to join us. So
excellent, thank you. I'm glad it's not just you sort of sitting in a bar waiting for other people to come and talk to you.
No, yeah.
But Bernard, would you like to kick off, because you know much more about TOP than I do? Although we did have your predecessor, Raf Manji, on several times in the run up to the last election.
Yeah, great to have you on the show, Q. It's really good to talk to some of the politicians. Next year is going to be a big year for politicians, but you're new, if you like, and for a lot of our listeners and readers, there is a lot of interest in. We're all policy wonks here. So policy's big. Could you tell us, firstly, why is this a new name for the party?
Yeah, and I'm still kind of getting used to the label of politician, but yeah, we'll get there. The new name, I think, part of it was about having a general brand refresh. We think we need to bring a different look and feel to this election. We have, been here 3 times before, and we have a good solid base, but to reach that 5%, we do need to do something a little bit different. We did test a few different names, so we thought about straying away from opportunity, but really we thought that it still encapsulated what the heart of this party is about. The shift from opportunities to opportunity is, we felt better encapsulated the singular opportunity that we have for New Zealand at the moment, and the need to really shift our political system and our economic system to something quite different from what we're in now. And yeah, I mean, TOP, I think it's going to be hard to shake TOP as a name. It's obviously still our acronym.
I was going to ask you, is it now the Opportunity Party, so we can still call you TOP? Because
you can, but we'd love for everyone to say opportunity a lot more, because that is really what we stand for.
Wasn't there a television show called Opportunity Knocks at one point, Bernard?
Awesome.
A game show on one of those ghastly game shows on a Saturday night.
I think we're betraying our age.
Yes.
Q, could you tell us? Q, could you tell us your story? Because you're sort of new to the political scene for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. So my background is in business. I've been working in the business sector, try and help businesses grow and succeed, but also look after the environment and the communities that they operate in at the same time. So a big part of that, I was the country director for B Corp certification, which some people might recognise in New Zealand. So we've got some great B Corps in New Zealand, like Sharesies, Kathmandu. Stuff, yep. Sawmill Brewery, some awesome businesses that are doing, circular economy stuff, giving back to communities, looking after their workers. And so that's kind of the bulk of my career has been in that space. And then more recently, I was at KPMG, so more in the corporate world. And the reason for going there really was I felt like most of my career I spent working with the 1% of the converted that understood that there was a different way to do things. And I wanted to get that first-hand experience working with the bigger corporates in New Zealand to help them get started on that sustainability journey. But throughout my whole career, I constantly came up against the need for systemic change, that we can't rely on a few businesses doing the right thing for this to become, the norm. And so we need legislative change, not just in business, but in the way we operate in communities, as individuals, as neighbours. And so it felt like the right time for me to do this personally, and that the Opportunity Party is probably the only party I could do that with full integrity, that I really align with and believe in the values and the policies of the party. So
So
it felt,
what would you describe those values as? If
yeah,
someone, one of those 98% who didn't vote for the party
yeah,
the last 3 times, and
yeah.
they said, so what are your values?
Yeah, so I mean, the one that we talk about the most, and people have probably heard, is being really evidence based. So, not being ideological or being stuck to one side of the political spectrum just because of an ideology, but actually following the evidence and keeping up with, things change, research changes, and we need to change as a society with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, that would be one. I think another is around courage. And we talk about having no too hard basket at the Opportunity Party. So, we are prepared to tackle those really big challenges like our housing market, superannuation, infrastructure, and we believe that we can come together and find some common ground on those issues. But we do have to be brave, and we do have to be willing to step a little bit outside of our comfort zone to do that.
So what would be the 3 policies you'd talk about to back up those values when you're talking to one of the 98%?
Yeah, so our tax reset is pretty bold, pretty courageous, and trying to tackle something which has been put in the too hard basket for a long time in New Zealand. That's really about trying to bring house prices down through the land value tax. And then it's offset by our citizens' income, which is a bit like a UBI, Universal Basic Income, for those that know what that is. So essentially a payment that goes to almost all Kiwis. And I think what's quite interesting about this is those that are on the right really like the simplification of the system. So it removes a lot of bureaucracy and administration in the welfare system. But those on the left, can't deny that this is potentially the biggest tax break to the lower, income working population for New Zealand, and at the same time trying to bring house prices back within reach for them. So that is really a big, I think, that's been a cornerstone of the party since the beginning, since Gareth Morgan set it up, and that is still a key part of what we stand for. And then I think the other side of that, which is kind of more my background, is how we build a different kind of economy for New Zealand going forward, and one that looks after nature and actually thrives because we look after our oceans and our soils and our mountains. That will be what makes us stand out and gives us that competitive advantage on the world stage. We've not really given that a good crack as a country yet, and there are so many missed opportunities at the moment for us to really thrive in that space.
So what's your ambition as leader? What's success look like?
So we are really gunning for the 5% this time. So we've had about 63,000 votes at the last election. So we need to double that, and we'll be in. So it's not a huge ask. 130,000 votes, and that will get us in. And I think we would be a very attractive coalition partner to either National or Labour if they're the majority party come election time. And I think we would help either of them move their agenda forward, but also hold them accountable on certain things, so that we keep this country kind of moving forward and stop the flip-flopping that we've seen so much of over the last couple of election cycles.
So, this is a cheap and easy and boring question, but what are your bottom lines?
We have not really come out with our bottom lines just yet. I think we will early, next year, once we've got our full policy detail. Obviously, there's probably going to be something around tax, and land value tax. Obviously, Labor's talking about capital gains. We don't think that goes anywhere near far enough to change the behaviours that we need to see to fix that problem. And I think our bottom line will be different, whether it's National or Labour, because if it's National, we're going to want to hold them to account more on things like the environment and looking after those lower income earners. And if it's Labour, we might want to hold them more accountable on making sure that we are getting the best value for money and spending wisely to grow our economy in the right way.
So why should someone vote for the Opportunity Party rather than the Greens? Because they also have a wealth tax and have talked a bitish about basic incomes, and they're also keen on reducing emissions and that sort of thing. So why not just vote for Green? Because they're much more likely to get over the 5% level, and there's little risk of your vote being wasted.
Yeah, I think the challenge with the Greens is they've very much pegged themselves to the left. They've sort of said that they won't work with National, and that poses a danger that the environment gets completely left off the table if it's a National-led government. And even if Labour are the ones that get in next election, National will be back in at some point. And so we need a minor party that can work with National and make sure that we incentivize people to look after our environment and keep that on the table at every election. I think that there are potentially some people that have voted Greens in the past that will be attracted to voting for the Opportunity Party, that are pro-business and pro-environment, and that's part of what we really stand for.
So we have this unusual quirk, really, with MMP, the 5% threshold, which means for those who think a bit more about their votes and are being strategic, there's this sort of valley of death, really, between 0 and maybe 4 or 5% in the polls, where if you're not anywhere close to 5% or even over 5% by, a couple of months before the election, you sort of become irrelevant, and for a whole bunch of people, they get really nervous about wasted vote. So is there a deadline beyond which you say, actually, gee, we're not close enough to 5% in the polls, and if we can carry on here, we risk the current government being re-elected with, a margin of 50,000 votes, and our 63,000 votes cost, a change of government, which we quite like or not.
Yeah, and I do sympathise with people who have that view. I think none of the votes that have been for our party in the past are wasted. I don't know if we would be here if all of those people hadn't voted for us in the past. So even though it's not gotten us over the 5% previously, it means that we're able to come back, at the next election. So I would really encourage anyone that feels like they align with us values-wise to vote that way, because a wasted vote is really one that you send to a party whose values you don't agree with. And the number of people that have said to me, if all the people that said that they got the Opportunity Party in that Compass survey actually voted for us, we could probably be in Parliament. So, our goal, obviously, we want to poll close to 5 as early as possible. That's why we're going hard early with getting the word out, talking to, everybody, that we can, getting out around the country. That we're coming in hot with a lot of energy.
So just on this land tax thing, why a land tax rather than a wealth tax or, a proper capital gains tax?
So in comparison to a wealth tax, we think we still want to create an economy where people want to grow their wealth and are incentivized to contribute to the economy in that way. You can't take property offshore in the same way that you could take your wealth offshore, for example. And so we think that a land tax is a better way to tax wealth, essentially, and also disincentivize behaviours around, making money through property. My KiwiSaver went up more, percentage-wise than my house did last year, and it made me think, maybe, banking on my house doubling in value in the next 10 years isn't the best strategy to save for my retirement. Maybe I should put it in more into KiwiSaver, into other funds. In comparison to a capital gains tax, particularly with the one that Labour's proposed, we think it disincentivize particularly people who are holding on to empty lots of land, because they'll just hold on to that for longer and only have to pay the tax once at the end. Whereas with a land value tax, if you're land banking or have property portfolios where you're not adding value, that land tax will start to hurt, and so it will incentivize those people to either build more high density housing or sell it to somebody who's willing to do that.
Thanks. Q, it's Peter here. May I ask you a couple of questions? I've been looking into lately the abundance agenda, and I'm sure you know what that is. New book out by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, where they argue that, if we were to fully achieve the benefits of solar power and renewables and so on, that we could actually, that the left or liberals could, or progressive parties, I think we'd agree that the Opportunity Party is a progressive party, correct? Is that a label you're prepared to?
I think so. We really don't like the labels, but yeah, no.
Okay, well, are you and Opportunity an advocate for the abundance agenda? This idea that parties such as yours need to embrace economic growth, that there is a possibility of actually delivering significant growth because of the abundance of renewable energy and that kind of thing.
So I haven't actually read the book. I know of Ezra Klein, but is the argument that we can achieve the growth that we need through the use of renewables?
Yeah, it's a reversal of the kind of anti-growth or no-growth idea, and saying in fact what the left or centrist parties, progressive parties need to advocate is an idea of abundance.
Yeah.
Which a universal basic income could be part of, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And, that combined with the growth of technology like AI, that's going to fundamentally change how we work. And if we can build that economy on renewables where, it's cheaper to power, and therefore we can power things like big AI machines, which might mean then people work less and they can have a citizen's income to support that. I think that is a future that we stand for. And
where does Opportunity stand on the Treaty of Waitangi, the Waitangi Tribunal, the embedding of it in legislation and law, the way it's been done in the last 40 years? And how do you read the objections to what people sometimes call Maorification? Where do you guys stand on that?
Yeah. So we recognise Te Tiriti as a founding document of New Zealand, and we believe that in some there are some circumstances where redress and equity should be the focus, and particular restorative justice is required. There are other circumstances where the integration of Te Ao Māori and Māori values is really beneficial to all, and that we can all benefit. Whether it's through our health system or our education system. From principles from all cultures, including Māori. I think those two situations need to be, dealt with in context. And
what do you mean by that, Q?
Well, I suppose you need to look at a particular example, whether it's a particular community where Māori are disadvantaged, maybe it's in education. There might be an argument for mandating a particular quota of Māori students and through university, for example.
And you wouldn't object to that if it was addressing a particular data-driven fact.
Yeah, I think so. And in the same way that there would be other potential socioeconomic factors that need to be addressed and particular programs put in place.
Do you think you would have gotten rid of the Māori Health Authority?
I think that if it had been put, I don't think it got enough time to demonstrate its value or not. I think if we were in that position, we would have given it more time, because if we're going to commit to something like that, we really need to give it a proper go and support trying to make it work, rather than using it as a political football and kind of flip-flopping on that, because it just wastes everybody's time.
Okay. I actually, Bernard and I have a specialty of last questions. Is Gareth Morgan still funding the party, and do you see him in a sense as your Alan Gibbs, who of course created ACT?
So Gareth stepped back after the 2017 election. He hasn't been involved personally or by funding it since then. I think we owe a lot to him for setting the party up. At the same time, there have definitely been lots of changes since he's been involved, and so don't want to kind of discredit the work that he did to get us here, but we are also a different party to what we were in 2017.
Great. Thanks very much, Chief. Do you have any others, Bernard? Q?
No, that's great. Q, thank you so much for coming on the show. No doubt we'll talk again, and good luck in Whangarei.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
Professor Robert Patman from Dunedin. It's so good to see you. How are you?
Good afternoon. How are you guys?
Very good. I mean, I nearly had one of your PhD students come in today to evaluate his new PhD thesis on how we get on with the Gulf states, but we might do that next week. I think you know who I'm referring to.
Talking about Jeffrey.
Yes, who's very good. Now, I asked you to we want to talk mostly about Ukraine, I think, and because if you recall last week when we were talking, the Reuters exclusive came out, Axios then came out as well, with the details of this supposed 28-point plan, and then that evening we had Trump saying that Zelensky would have to agree it by today, essentially by Thanksgiving US time. Where do you think that's gone? We've had the Europeans working on it this week with Zelensky. We've got Marco Rubio in Geneva. What's going on and what's changed from your point of view? I asked you to do a little bit of a précis,
British politician who once said a week is a long time in politics, and so it's proved. The 28-point plan that was advanced by the Americans, and by the way, that involved an enormous U-turn by Marco Rubio, who initially said it was a Russian position paper and then claimed ownership. So, but what was the nuts and bolts of the 28-point plan? Essentially, it was a land for peace deal in exchange for making territorial concessions, including areas of Ukraine not currently occupied by the Russian army in the Donbass. In return, Mr. Putin would agree to a ceasefire, but there would have to be a cap.
You mean or stop his invasion?
Stop his invasion, curtail hostilities in return for territorial concessions, plus a cap on the Ukrainian army of 600,000, plus Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO. And this went down like a lead balloon in Europe. And what has emerged after a furious reaction in many European capitals is a refined 19-point plan. This will be decided. It involved apparently 2 days of very tough negotiations between Ukrainian and American teams over a Saturday and Sunday last week. And what we do know is the Americans have apparently relaxed the cap on 600,000 Ukrainian troops. In addition, it's believed restrictions on those who have committed war crimes under the original plan. They were all going to be exonerated. There will be no legal follow-up for those committing war crimes. Apparently, Ukraine has insisted that wording be changed. So those who've committed war crimes will be certainly the way a mechanism of bringing them to account. In addition, it seems that the question of the EU and NATO membership has been revised. Now, this is incredibly vague because these details have not been made public, but it's a 19-point plan according to, I think, Andrei Yermak, who led the Ukrainian team. Those 19 points bear no resemblance, very little resemblance to the 28-point plan. And what we do know, as the Europeans said quite candidly to the Trump team, there can't be a capitulation deal, and the settlement must respect territorial integrity of Ukraine, must respect the state sovereignty of Ukraine, which of course is something Mr. Putin's always been unwilling to do.
So, Robert, is there a 99.9% chance that Putin will reject this now? I mean, or it may actually also never get put to Putin, because presumably at the moment it's gone back to Rubio
the Kremlin,
and Witkoff.
They're extremely unhappy. They thought.
Sorry,
when I mentioned earlier there was a
Robert,
controversy.
we just lost a bit of probably because I was talking over you. Just start that sentence again. When I asked you what was going to happen next with Putin, or with was this even a?
Well, I think there's
plan?
real anger in the Kremlin that the Europeans and the Ukrainians have had the opportunity to water down what was their plan, originally written in Russian and handed to Americans, then translated apparently into bad English. And what is causing a tremendous storm in the United States, and not least in the Republican Party, has not only been the behavior of Steve Witkoff, Mr. Trump's Russian envoy, who apparently gave the Russians prompts on how they should draw up their plan and put it to his boss, Mr. Trump. But in addition, it appears that the State Department has made, well, it can only be said, a very humiliating situation in which the State Department at first confronted with fury from Republican members, senior Republican members. They confronted Marco Rubio, and he then said, it was a Russian position paper, which the Americans were meekly putting forward for discussion. But then they claimed within 24 hours after that, Marco Rubio did a complete U-turn under probably enormous pressure from his boss in the White House and said that it was an American document.
So he's done two U-turns. So which way is he now facing?
Yeah, I mean, this is causing there's pushback from the Europeans, but there's pushback from within the United States. I don't know if there was a poll over the weekend which showed only 16% of American people, they were presumably MAGA supporters, thought that a land for peace deal was acceptable to Americans. I mean, most Americans see Putin as the problem, not Zelensky. And this is where Mr. Trump is so out of step with American public opinion.
And Robert, what did you make of the leaking, the recording and leaking to Bloomberg News of a Witkoff conversation with the Russian negotiator, where Witkoff appeared to be more or less guiding the conversation, telling him to, it was essentially essentially representing himself as Trump and thanking the Russians for making it easier for Trump to get to this point. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary that something like that would leak in the way that it did if there wasn't quite a lot of resistance either in the State Department or in the U.S. intelligence services. To have a transcript like that suddenly emerge seemed pretty extraordinary to undermine it at the stage.
Well, I think those members of the State Department that are still in place and haven't quit are very unhappy. And this is amateur hour. Steve Witkoff and Trump are way out of their depth. And the Russians can hardly believe the naivety of Witkoff. He goes into the Kremlin holding his heart when he's dealing with a mass murderer.
When we say naivety, Robert, though, when we say naivety, is it worth remembering that Steve Witkoff made most of his money, or much of his money, from Russian oligarchs in developing in New York, and a certain person whose name is on Trump Tower also did the same?
Yeah. Both Trump and Witkoff have financially benefited from their association with Russians. But the interesting thing is that leak has caused a major problem within Trump's support for Trump within the Republican Party. Senior Republicans are calling for Witkoff to go. And they said that this amounts to treason, that he's acting on the interest not of the United States, but for what many Republicans describe as an adversary state, which is Russia.
Bernard.
So, Robert, I'm curious now to find out how Europe will react and how Ukraine and Europe together are reacting, because if I was a European leader looking at this, I go, oh my God, the US is completely captured. They've capitulated. They could pull out at any minute. We need to really pull finger and put an awful lot of kit on the ground in Ukraine, or ramp up our own defences. Not to mention, they all seem to be fending off drone attacks left, right, and centre. How is Europe going to react to this?
It's very difficult to say. I think they feel quite pleased that they've again watered down another attempt to hand part of Ukraine to Russia. This is not the first time the Europeans have carried out this sort of firefighting. But I do think, coming to your question, Peter, it's only a matter of when, not if, the Europeans say to the United States, actually, this is our security problem and we're not going to accept you trying to impose a deal on us. It's quite, we're witnessing movement towards a major split in the transatlantic alliance. And as I say, I don't think the timing remains unknown, but I think we're heading that way. And the irony is, of course, Mr. Trump has done a lot to encourage the Europeans to boost their defence expenditure, which may increase gradually their self-confidence to take this step. Where the Americans and Europeans, quite apart from the issues we've discussed, where they differ radically is their reading of the battlefield situation in Ukraine. The Americans keep saying, look, we have to do this to save Ukraine as a country, whereas the Europeans are basically taking the Zelensky line. Actually, Russian economy's really struggling. They're now selling gold to finance the war. Price of oil has plummeted, and they've got according to Moscow Times, they've got a 10 trillion hole in the budget. So there's, almost parallel interpretation of what's going on. And of course, as we've heard from going back a long way to the early months of the Trump administration, when Zelensky accused Trump of living in a Russian disinformation bubble, what is quite clear, and we've discussed this many times, so I'm not going to labor the point, what is not getting covered in a lot of the commentary about the Ukraine and Russia conflict, or the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is that the battle or the war is now being taken into Putin's backyard. And it's happening every night. The last 24 hours, massive strikes. And this is going on night after night. 38% of Russia's oil refining capacity has been lost in the last 3 months. And Nigel Gould-Davis, the person I couldn't remember his name, the Chatham, has reiterated his argument that time is not on Putin's side. But, your question, Bernard, really is pertinent, because the Europeans have to recognize that they are more than a match for Putin. If you look at the combined economies of the EU and NATO countries, the European ones, there's no problem, but they're going to have to be businesslike if they want to do this. And I think the tragedy of this situation is, once again, Mr. Trump has misread Zelensky and does not. The basic problem with the Trump administration is they keep treating Putin and Zelensky from a position of moral equivalency, where the aggressor that has illegally invaded the country is treated as a co-equal with the victim of aggression. And, the implications for this are not only big for Europe, but they're big for New Zealand and Australia and the other liberal democracies, because, after all, Mr. Trump is showing no sympathy for the rule of law, given his proposals. And secondly, he's showing, as we've already discussed before, he has absolutely no concern about free trade. And we, as a country, have to stop daddy diplomacy as well. We have to start putting our interests ahead of trying to impress someone who doesn't share our perspective on how the world should be run. Europe could be the catalyst for that. If Europe decides enough is enough, I wouldn't be surprised if countries like Australia and New Zealand started following the Canadian example. But clearly, this is it's going to involve a degree of courage and self-confidence that we haven't seen from many liberal democracies so far.
Yeah.
Just finally from me, Robert, can the Europeans actually, replace the Americans? Surely the American kit in Ukraine, all of that intelligence, all of that stuff, that's irreplaceable, isn't it?
No.
The Europeans nowhere near able to
Well,
match
actually,
the American
Let's
contribution.
be quite clear about this. The Europeans are largely taken throughout this conflict. Germany was always the second biggest provider of heavy military equipment, and the Brits were third. Intelligence will be more of a challenge, but there's already been steps taken in the last 6 months. I mean, in a sense, the Ukrainians are stalling for time. They would love to keep the Americans on board. And what the Ukrainians are doing is delaying as long as possible that rupture. But the Ukrainians have taken quite decisive steps internally to be able to prosecute this war without Trump. In fact, Zelensky said in an interview to Bloomberg that he's not frightened of Trump, and ultimately he will be guided by what he regards as best for his country. What sort of steps have they taken? They've developed their own long-range missiles, Flamenco. They've extended Neptune, and they're not getting tourists from the Germans, but they have, as we've discussed before, they've got about 300 state-of-the-art fighter aircraft arriving both from France and Sweden in January.
Yeah. Although it will be very difficult to deploy all of those without the overarching US intelligence that's been so valuable.
Yeah. Look, there's no doubt about it. It's going to blow. But on the other hand, you have to say it would have been a bigger blow 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Look at where the Russians are. They lost nearly 1.5 million troops, either killed or severely incapacitated. Their economy is going through the floor. And how long can they keep this up? So, in a sense, if the Europeans were to throw their weight behind Ukraine and defy the United States, I think Ukraine could ride that out much more comfortably than they could had this confrontation between Europe and America occurred just shortly after the invasion.
Robert, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to move on to the environment and climate with Catherine, but thank you very much for doing that, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine, it's lovely to have you on. Welcome in to a slightly different position in the show. We had to do a bit of rejigging, but it's lovely to have you on for another huge week in climate news, particularly the fallout from COP30 and a good story from Mark Talder at Newsroom that we'll link to in the show notes, showing how New Zealand seems to have parted company from our natural allies in deciding to basically give up on transitioning away from fossil fuels. What did you make of that?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, I cannot understand for a minute why New Zealand, which is not a fossil fuel, exporting country, wouldn't have been involved in that. It's just, like Australia signed up to it, UK signed up to it, and we didn't. So it's really difficult to understand, but it's also even the reasons that the minister has given for not agreeing to sign up for it are quite incoherent in terms of, where we've been in the past. So, he basically said we didn't agree with the language of phase out, except that the declaration in Berlin doesn't include the word phase out. It says transitioning away from fossil fuels, which is what was agreed at COP29. The only time that phase out is mentioned in that declaration is in relation to phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, which is something that in the past New Zealand has been leading on pushing. That was one of John Key's kind of things, was to push for the phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies. And so it is extraordinary that we're not in there and that there's not even any good reason why we wouldn't be in there.
And it's interesting to see, it looks like the Europeans and the Brits have noticed, finally. And there's a piece from Glenn McConnell at Stuff today saying that 3 British ministers have started asking questions about the reversal of the ban on oil and gas exploration, which is particularly relevant for the Brits, who overnight in their budget announced the extension of their own ban on oil and gas exploration. And the Europeans too have noticed, gee, what happened to these New Zealanders? They seem to have done a backflip. Is the proverbial hitting the spinning object, as we say?
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd have to imagine that it's going to at some point, right? Like, we a lot of us here in New Zealand are kind of asking questions about, what's happening to our 2030 Paris Agreement targets? What's the roadmap for that? And is there one that makes any sense anymore? And so, it's sooner or later they're going to notice, and sooner or later I think they're going to start to see pressure from their own agriculture sectors and everything else that stand to benefit if we lose those free trade agreements.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether the natural allies of the government in the rural sector start to feel the blowback and start to change their own positions. Just one interesting thing that's sort of crept up this week as well is the end of carbon capture in a particularly big project. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so the plan that that we had added into our emissions planning for the short term. So we'd added in this carbon capture and storage, amounts of reductions, and it happened a little while ago that the Kapuni gas field, which is where they were planning to put these in place, sort of came out and said, well, the carbon price has dropped and now it doesn't really make sense for us anymore. And now it's actually been removed from the government's plan for the future as well. So, it's gone burger, and no doubt because they've actually now crashed the ETS completely. So if it wasn't looking profitable before, it certainly isn't now. And really the only way that would continue to happen is if we, the taxpayers, were paying for it. And what CCS, what carbon capture and storage does in a gas field like that is it helps them to extract the last remaining bits of gas out of the field, so it becomes part of an extraction technique. And for oil and gas companies, that's seemingly more to the point of what they want it for than actually storing carbon dioxide underground. So unless you and I want to pay for that, it's unlikely to.
I'm a bit short on funds at the moment.
Soon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
honestly,
it is
this
extraordinary
something
that is such a the fact that the carbon trading scheme has been sabotaged, and then that sabotages one of the potential solutions is such an extraordinary and sort of obvious knock-on effect.
This is happening all across the board, where the government at the moment is removing pieces of our emissions reduction infrastructure, architecture, the policy architecture that supports us meeting our Paris Agreement targets is being dismantled piece by piece. And of course, when you do that, it has knock-on effects all over the place. So one piece you pull out has a knock-on effect for another piece, which has another effect for and there's just seemingly no accounting for any of that. They're not really paying attention to what are the wholesale effects of all of this, and what are you actually trying to achieve in the long run, and what would a good policy infrastructure look
Catherine,
like?
Do you think that there is an ideological, more than a gap, but there's an ideological determination, particularly in New Zealand First? I'm just thinking, and also having heard this week about the very good RNZ report about oil energy lobbyists being included in the Shane Jones discussions. Those are the acts of climate change denialists, aren't they? Or don't give a fuck denialists.
Yeah, and to be honest, this is another thing that's happening across government. It's not even just in climate change, where they're getting corporate lobbyists to come in and write the regulations for us that then get applied to the rest of us. So that's even a bigger issue than just across the environment and climate. We are seeing corporate lobbyists writing our policy for us, and this came up with the clean car discount last week as well. It turned out that government advisors only had time to consult with vested interests, the car industry,
Thank God
about
it hasn't
those changes.
Thank God it hasn't happened in somewhere important like tobacco and health. I mean, that would be even more outrageous, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's So it's the question's been asked at the moment, I think, who is running this government?
And in whose interest?
Yeah. One of the comments that was really interesting in that article by Kirsty Johnston at RNZ about the oil and gas thing, she put in the government's response to questions about, what they were doing with the oil and gas, particularly around decommissioning. And then at the end of the sentence, she just put, the lobbyists agreed. And it was kind of like a brilliant piece of writing, because you're kind of like, yeah, no kidding. They're speaking like it's one voice speaking here. It's not like there's two different points of view. It is the corporate lobbyists and the government have exactly the same voice in that legislation. So, of course, they agree.
And let's just remember, as one sort of push for how brilliant the Kaka can be and how brilliant Bernard is, we've been addressing this issue of lobbyists and the speed with which they turn through Parliament and all of that stuff, right from the beginning of the Kaka. And these are the consequences, is that you get, it is also true that you need industry consultation and that they are experts, but it is one of these problems that there is, tremendous shadowy lobbying in New Zealand that we just don't see visibly until somebody like Kirsty gets an OAI answer.
And I think that particular article about the oil and gas thing as well, what the lobbyists were particularly concerned about is being expected to pay the decommissioning and cleanup costs when those wells are finished. And so there was a disaster a few years ago where TUI Group or something like that, they declared bankruptcy and left with $300 million of decommissioning costs that then became taxpayer costs.
Of course.
And so what the lobbyists particularly wanted in that piece of legislation was for their requirements to indemnify against that sort of thing to be watered down so that they...
Absolutely.
And basically some of the directors from that particular company, TUI, were some of the ones that were talking to Shane Jones, that were turning up and
OMG, I haven't.
Lobbying.
Did Kirsty have that in her story? That's a doozy.
It was in her story.
I need to go and read it again.
And so,
Thank you.
what they want to do is transfer those costs to taxpayers.
Yeah.
And the context for that is that our gas infrastructure is now aging. They're looking at having to close it down sometime soon. There's looking to be a lot of costs associated with that. And so those lobbyists are going to the government saying, well, we want to get out of jail free card. We want to be able to leave you holding the bill for this. And I can't even, any government that's supposed to be representing the interests of
the nation,
the people who vote for them, is not just signing up for that. They're not just saying, yeah, okay, we will, you can slip away back overseas, with your bounty from, the profits that you made and leave us carrying the bills for cleaning up after you and for decommissioning those.
Yeah,
that infrastructure.
Catherine, that's such an interesting aspect. Bernard, are we?
Yes, thank you very much, Catherine. We'll make sure we put a link into Kirsty's excellent report and also the ones from Mark and also from Kate Newton. They're doing great work at the moment. It's really encouraging to see. Catherine, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming, and see you next week, if not before.
And
so Bernard,
Peter,
you've got a couple of soliloquies, is that right?
Yes,
or you're going to do a sort of joint soliloquy about interest rates, KiwiSaver, whether are you going to tackle this issue of whether Nicola Willis is the greatest finance minister since Nigel Lawson in the UK?
I wouldn't agree with that. I know that's what the Prime Minister thinks, but the record is not great. When you look at the most recent forecasts from the Reserve Bank that came out yesterday, it looks like, according to the Reserve Bank, the economy will have grown on average by 0.3% per year in this first term of the national-led government, and that the housing market will have fallen around 5% during the time of this government, having already fallen 19% under the previous in the previous 2 years of the previous Labor government. So on its own measures of success in terms of economic growth and asset prices that matter for most New Zealanders, this has not been a great success according to the official forecaster of the government. So this is it's an interesting time in the economy where we've had 325 basis points of cuts in the last 15, 16 months, and it feels like the economy hasn't done much yet. It's a bit like injecting the stimulant into the heart of the economy and hoping that they burst to life like some sort of Frankenstein's creation, or like one of those needles that gets plunged into your heart when it stops.
Oh, Jesus.
And it
you
hasn't
mean by Uma Thurman or was it into
Yes,
Uma Thurman's chest? It was was by John Travolta into Uma Thurman's chest. That's right.
Exactly. And that's the 325 basis points. Now, the question is, when is Uma Thurman, our economy, going to burst to life again? And interesting numbers have come out just today, actually, from the ANZ Business Outlook survey showing there looks to be some glimmerings of green shoots, or Uma seems to have started shaking. So that's encouraging, but will it be enough for the government to get elected next year, having tied their fortunes to this idea of growth, when actually our economy can't grow very fast when our housing market isn't doing much and we don't have much net migration, which we don't. And that's because our jobs market is so weak. And that is...
So we have net emigration, right?
Not
quite yet, but...
Of citizens, yeah. We still have net immigration, and it is bouncing off its lows, but typically our economy doesn't grow much unless we've got lots of immigration and lots of house price inflation. both of which aren't possible really in the next year or so. There is going to be a bounce as, just the natural effects of 325 basis points worth of needle to the heart flows through. But it's not going to happen fast enough for the government by its own measures. The question is whether the opposition is able to sort of weaponise this problem and turn it into an election victory. That's a whole new question. And we shall see next year. My view on the Prime Minister's future has changed somewhat, if only because the party's position is now so weak. And the party itself is worried that if it does change leadership, it'll be even more unpopular. So the Christopher Luxon, I think, has survived through Christmas after this week's open questions about leadership challenges. We heard from Chris Bishop and Nicola Willis both saying, we're not going to do it. It's not going to happen on our watch. And it would only happen if he stepped aside voluntarily, potentially next year if we saw national support base well into the mid to low 20s. That's when it all goes horribly wrong for the Prime Minister. And that's an opportunity for the opposition, which I don't necessarily see them taking at the moment. So we're looking forward to a interesting year in our political economy.
And Bernard, you wanted to I sent you a piece by Eric Frickberg, who I hadn't realised was now a freelance journalist. He was an RNZ journalist for 35 years. Although that was slightly embarrassing because when I looked that up just now, he started after I'd left, so it means he's actually, despite looking quite old, even younger than me. He wrote a really good piece about the worst decision that a New Zealand Prime Minister had ever taken, which was the superannuation decision by Muldoon to make it non-contributory and so on. How would you like to sort of position that conversation briefly, but also its linkage to some extent to the KiwiSaver dilemma and this whole idea of putting in 12%, but 6 and 6?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the great sliding doors moments in our political and economic history. If in 1975 we had kept that Labour scheme, we would be a different country. We would be a richer, more vibrant country. We had another chance, actually, really, in the late 80s, early 90s, when Australia did exactly this. Under Paul Keating, he did a very clever deal where he essentially shut down inflation by doing a deal with the unions not to push for a big wage increase. Yeah. And he's a genius, by the way. And we chose not to go anywhere near that. Instead, went down a very hardline neoliberal track of simply cutting the size of government. It didn't work. It's clear it didn't work. That was our last chance, actually, I think, to really catch up with and achieve our potential. It's now very difficult with our open borders with Australia, both in terms of trade and labour, to actually recover that. Because now we have, what essentially I think is a performative political approach of the current government, which is to say, we can do just like the Australians, we can do 12% too, but actually it's not a real 12% because at least half employers essentially salary sacrifice their in theory contribution of 6%. They essentially say that's your total salary. You can choose to have it 6% in KiwiSaver if you want.
I don't think I fully realised that.
It's not compulsory, unlike the Australian one. And also the government's not contributing anything at all. In fact, even to the point where its contributions to state sector employees, the government contribution is now going to have to be made up with savings from other parts of the budget. So there's no sacrifice on the part of the government when it talks about 12%. It's nothing like the Australian scheme.
To do anything good.
No, we are still well on track to be a housing market with bits tacked on. It really is
Bernard,
one of those.
Bernard, it's also worth making the point of you. I mean, in a sense, you've made it, but I haven't really. All of those people going to Australia, your A320 every day, they are the people who would otherwise be paying for your and my looming superannuation.
Ah, yes, this is a great story. How is it we are going to afford all of this if they've already gone and they're not paying taxes?
Exactly.
There's a whole bunch of New Zealanders who think, no problem. There's going to be a whole bunch of immigrants who will come in and pay for it. We won't give them full rights as residents, and they may beg to become residents, but they will pay the rent to us as landlords, and we will keep flying across to Australia to visit our kids and our grandkids every now and again. Great holiday, by the way. And it will all carry on. And anyway, I don't have to deal with it because I'll be dead in 30 or 40 years' time.
Don't even listen. Jesus Christ! Don't end the show on a gloomy note. We love you,
but I'm channeling how voters are thinking, which is not my problem. They should just suck it up and move on. And anyway, if they leave the country, that's one vote that won't be pledged against us. So this is where the political thinking is.
I'm just going to go and get some razor blades, Bernard. That sounds pretty good. Thank you.
No. You got to think. You got to channel the opposition to this. Remember, I've been through 4 election campaigns where the capital gains tax was essentially either the main item of discussion or the elephant in the room that everyone's so scared of discussing that it really is the thing that matters. And we said no every time. And I could see quite easily some sort of economic recovery next year, some engineered house price inflation being enough to get the government back in, Te Pāti Māori completely imploding, Labour coming in with a meh campaign, Top taking 4.9% of the vote and it being wasted, and no change of government.
Interesting, Bernard. So, I don't really agree with you necessarily on the tax question, but I absolutely agree with you. I would say that a truly imaginative government would make KiwiSaver tax deductible and would start a long progression to a contributory superannuation scheme, and would, as a friend of ours, Adam Jasa in Poland did when he was the economic advisor to the economics minister, effectively introduced an incremental increase in pension age, which is a gigantic achievement because you tie it to people's living standards, you tie it to people living longer, and you show everybody what it's going to be. It's not next year that we turn off every old lady who used to work in Smith and Coe's. You've got to do it progressively. But there is no incentive at the moment for anybody to think long term in the economy from a tax point of view, from a superannuation point of view, or from an investment point of view. It seems to me, Bernard.
That's right. Poland is a really interesting example. It has grown its GDP per capita much faster than us in the last 20 years. Productivity growth, investment, all of those things. And actually, when you look on a purchasing power parity basis, Poland is now richer than New Zealand. So this is...
and than the UK. It's just coming up to be richer than the UK, which is fucking terrifying to the UK for all those people who used to have Polish plumbers and Polish builders. Bernard, our lovely colleague Simon is calling time on us. So I was going to use this story as a Brexit metaphor because everything's like it, but maybe it's a metaphor for the New Zealand economy, the skateboarding dog this week. It's slightly sad.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Which is about a woman in Thailand shot temple staff when she was being moved into the crematorium in her coffin, when she started tapping on the wall of the coffin, and they realized that she was not in fact dead. She was 65 and she'd already been driven 500 miles from one end of Thailand to another to be cremated, and fortunately communicated. And as the temple manager said, I was a bit surprised, so I asked them to open the coffin, and everyone was startled. I saw her opening her eyes slightly and knocking on the side of the coffin. She must have been knocking for quite some time. So on that, let's use that as a metaphor for the New Zealand economy rather than Brexit this time, Bernard.
There's hope for us all. The economy is knocking on the side of the coffin going,
exactly,
let me out.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody.
Ka kite anō, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.